Margaret Rutherford's early life was actually very tragic. Before she was born, her father attacked her grandfather, who was a minister of the church, with a chamber pot, which sounds kind of comical, but actually the poor man died. Was found in a pool of blood. And Margaret's father ended up in Broadmoor. When he came out, the family went to India, where her mother committed suicide. So her father brought Margaret back to England, and she was told from a very early age that she was an orphan. Her father ended up back in Broadmoor, and Margaret went to live with her aunt, Bessie Nicholson, in Wimbledon. And she had a very lonely childhood. So it was an incredibly tragic way to start life. And because her father suffered from mental illness and her mother committed suicide, Margaret Rutherford always felt that she was destined for some kind of tragic end as well. And lived really under the spectre of having mental illness all her life. In fact, she did suffer from bipolar disorder, and throughout her life had electric convulsive treatment, had lots of depressions in and out of institutions. So that early start really dogged her life. Well, Margaret, as she was known as Peggy when she was a child, was told by the family that her father died, I think, to protect her from this sort of terrible story. And so until the age of 12, that's what she believed. And then one day, a tramp appeared at the door of her aunt's house and said that he had known her father in Broadmoor. And this threw Margaret into, you can imagine, a terrible state of anxiety. And in fact, from her school records at the time, you can tell she missed a lot of school at that time. So I think that was true, that they kind of had kept it quiet. But she did discover that her father was alive. There's no evidence that they ever saw each other. And I think the family did it really to try and protect her. They thought it was better this way. But Margaret kept that pretense all the way through her life. Even in her autobiography, she wrote that she was an orphan and her father died in tragic circumstances. But this was actually what happened, and she kept up the pretense for a long time. She actually started in rep, local rep, and she had it 1 year at the Old Vic in the 1920s. She wanted to be an actress in the great tradition of Ellen Terry. But I suppose she worked in rep, but she wanted to be a straight dramatic actress. But I suppose it was her the way she looked, the fact that she was funny. I mean, she had funny bones. The rest of her was pretty funny too. But she was always cast then as playing a dotty, scatty type, and I think that was a great regret in her life. She did play Miss Danvers and Rebecca. And later on, towards the end of her life, she played Mistress Quickly in Chimes of Midnight, the Orson Welles film, in which she was wonderful. But I think that was a major regret of her life. She didn't actually make her debut in the West End until she was 41. But I suppose she was in the importance of being Ernest as Miss Prism. And then I suppose the biggest break really was playing Madame Arcati in Blithe Spirit, which was a part that was written for her by Noel Coward, and she was in the play and then in the film, and I think that's probably what how she first really came into the public interest. Well, Margaret first appeared in the play The Happiest Days of Your Life, in which she made over 400 appearances, and Frank Launder came to see the play one night, saw her in action, and realised that actually it would make a wonderful film, trying to compete with Ealing Studios, and that's how she was cast. Well, Margaret Rutherford as Miss Whitchurch was indomitable. She was strong. She described Miss Whitchurch as having the heart of gold, but was no marshmallow. She was a strong woman. You can imagine her being a suffragette, really, in an earlier time. She took no nonsense from Wetherby Pond, and she wanted the best for her girls. And she also, apart from just wanting the best for her girls, she made sure that she took Mr. Pond's living quarters. So she was certainly strong and wouldn't take any nonsense. In terms of bureaucracy, right from early on, there's a quote, Alistair Sim complaining about the local train service, says, "Oh, this has never been the same since the railway system was nationalised." And we see a succession of sort of bumbling men from the ministry passing the buck, passing the files on to each other when the confusion reigns. And you see the in trays full of sort of tea trays, and no one knows quite what's happening. And of course, at the end, another busload of boys and girls arrive, and the minister, the representative from the education department, is there saying, "Oh, they're ahead of schedule." So it's continued to be bumbling, and the Richard Waters, who's marvellous as ever, one of the teachers, doesn't escape the satire. And when Joyce Grenfell Gossage says to him, "Well, these adventures are set to break the monotony of life," he says, "I love monotony." So it's a set in 1949. There was still rationing. Things weren't quite right. Well, poor old Margaret wasn't exactly Audrey Hepburn. And the critics were absolutely vicious, really. They described her as a gargoyle, as a ragbag of a terrible face. I mean, she obviously wasn't going to play romantic leads. So inevitably, she was cast as a sort of indomitable, strong woman. And she said there was never any challenge if she didn't play someone who was strong. So that was, she did obviously get typecast in that way, but I think she was never destined to play a romantic lead, or foil to a male lead. She said she found the film rather tiresome, although it was only 9 weeks, I think, to make. She actually preferred being in the stage play, but Frank Launder thought she was wonderful, of course, and was quoted as saying she never missed her mark. She was always there, and if ever there was a need for another take, she always got it absolutely right. And unlike some actresses who do a different take each time, she did exactly the same each time, incredibly professional to the end. So I think they were pleased with her. Margaret Rutherford needed someone to be there with her at all times. She was anxious about things. Her health wasn't the best, and so she made sure that Stringer Davis, her husband, was put in her contract that he could appear where possible in all her work, be it theatre or cinema. And poor old Stringer wasn't the greatest of actors, and in fact the part that he plays in The Happiest Days is typical of a kind of, he plays a vicar, I think, of one of the school governors. But he was always there with her. They were companions for many years. And he looked after her when she needed looking after, and I think she had to put up with his prissiness and his piano playing occasionally. But they were great companions, and he was always there for her. She and Joyce Grenfell were staying in a hotel nearby. The film was actually filmed at the Byculla School in Hampshire. And the headmistress of the school actually had a cottage in the grounds. And in the evenings, Joyce Grenfell and Margaret Rutherford used to go and spend time with her, talking about things and school life and everything. But also, the headmistress got them to do a little bit of sewing, because there was so much sewing needed, as you can imagine. And Joyce Grenfell was rather adept at this. Margaret Rutherford wasn't quite such a domestic goddess, and I can imagine was there for moral fortitude and strength. But it was interesting that they spent a lot of time together, and Margaret Rutherford was very fond of Joyce Grenfell, who they had worked together briefly before. They got on very well. She always said that when she inhibited this part, a little bit of soul went into hers, and so she took on the persona of the person that she was playing. When she played Miss Danvers in Rebecca, for example, the sinister Miss Danvers, she really did suffer. She took on the character so much that she ended up with quite a depression. So she really took on the part of that she was playing. It became her life, and it was the most important thing in her life. She was very generous with other actors. She never tried to steal the limelight, and I think everybody loved to. I mean, she was incredibly physical. The physicality of that she had was like no one else. And you can't imagine a director or producer saying, "Go out and find me a Margaret Rutherford type." I mean, she was unique. I think Margaret enjoyed the stage role more than the film. A good friend of hers was in the play, and she actually found LSSM a little difficult, which is about the worst that she ever said about anybody. She was always very kind to everybody. But she liked stage. She liked stage generally more than film. But I think she liked also being in a repertory company. She liked being part of that group. She was very social with her friends when she was acting with them. I think Margaret was just like the universal aunt. She was so likable. Everybody, I suppose there's a little bit in us that all wants to be slightly different, slightly eccentric, and Margaret Rutherford was a true eccentric. I mean, the parts that she played weren't a million miles away from her own persona. And she used to wear the most ridiculous clothes. She could be seen when she was in the theatre. She used to walk from her home in Highgate to the theatre in sort of capes, and she wore outfits that she'd kind of made from blankets, and which none of which matched, and which Stringer always said how glamorous she looked in. It was a matter of opinion. But I think she was this lovable character. They loved her. They loved her for her work. She never took the limelight away from other actors. She was very generous with them. And she was also incredibly sociable. Was always throwing parties for her fellow actors and actresses. Very generous with them. And she was. I mean, there's a lovely story how she won an Oscar, an Academy Award for the VIPs, which she filmed in the early 60s. And Elizabeth Taylor then was sort of demanding a huge dressing room which had to be knocked into three, and a queen-size bed, and it had to be painted, and she had mauve, and she had to have flowers delivered daily. Well, all Margaret Rutherford asked for was a baby Belling stove so that she could cook her eggs and bacon, which she and Stringer enjoyed every evening. That was the most that she demanded from anybody. But she was well respected by everybody, very professional and much loved.